Okay, today's all about nature and pollution. It's got a bigger and fancier title that some of you have seen, but just to fit it on the screen, I've shortened it for you. So, how are our emissions affecting biodiversity? There's a question to start us off. So let's look at nature first and how it's coping on our planet. And the answer to that question is not very well. In the last 50 years, a lot of things have gone wrong. Global populations have declined on average by 68% since 1970. 1 million plant and animal species are now at risk of extinction. Our governments, and that's worldwide, not just the UK, have hit 0 of the 20 biodiversity targets for this decade. We're spending millions or trillions on nature and its services, but obviously it's not getting us very far. And deforestation accounts for nearly 20% of global carbon emissions, which is quite a shocking statistic. We need to act now to stop extinction.
Over the course of my life, I've encountered some of the world's most remarkable species of animals. Only now do I realise just how lucky I've been. Many of these wonders seem set to disappear forever.
The UN panel of experts has found that 1 million animal and plant species face extinction.
It is worse than expected. This is happening much faster than we've ever seen before. Today, we are the asteroid that's causing many, many species to go extinct simultaneously.
The evidence is that unless immediate action is taken, this crisis has grave impacts for us all.
We're not just losing nice things to look at, we're losing critical parts of our system.
And it's threatening our food, our water, our climate. We are encroaching further and further every day into wildlife habitat, and that drives emerging diseases.
If we carry on like this, we will see more epidemics as bad as this, and some of them could even be worse.
It's never been more critical for us to understand what is driving this crisis. Scientists have identified the key ways in which we humans are destroying the ecosystems on which we depend.
There are many ways to remove pieces of the puzzle. The most obvious way is to kill something, and we do a lot of that.
We're talking about millions of animals being snatched from the wild from thousands of species.
We have massive and widespread overfishing.
We're completely destroying the natural balance of fish in the world's oceans.
When I was a kid in the 1960s, there were 3 billion people in the world. And I'm now probably going to see it actually reach, 9 billion in my lifetime, which is pretty startling.
Population growth is much, much higher in the developing world than in the developed.
But it's problematic to just talk about population because there are two things which are going on. It's population, but it's also consumption.
And in terms of impact on the planet, what's much more important is the growth in consumption levels. And these are far higher in the developed economies.
While in a country like the United Kingdom, where some very strong laws on how to reduce pollution, we do have to realise we're no longer a major industrial country. Most of the things that we actually use are produced abroad in countries where the laws can be non-existent. So we're simply moving our footprint on destroying nature to another country.
Many people imagine there's this untouched wilderness because they see us on their TV screens. But the reality is there's really not a lot of wild left out there.
We've converted 75% of the land that is not covered by ice.
3/4 of the terrestrial surface has been changed, a lot of it just to feed one species.
all of the calculations show we're on track for a 3 to 4 degree world. And the more the Earth warms, the worse the problem is.
There are lots of ways that climate change will impact on species. These are no longer predictions. We're seeing it happen.
For those of us who care about the future of our planet, we have to look at our lifestyles. We can't look away from our own behaviours.
40 years ago, people consumed a good deal less in the United Kingdom. But there is no evidence that we were unhappier then than we are now.
We can be more diligent about thinking about what we're consuming and when. It's really digging down, saying, what's going on here? Where does that come from?
We need to think about meat and dairy consumption.
That's not to say that none of us should ever eat meat or should cut all dairy out of our diets, but we have to demand that they are produced sustainably. We also need to start producing affordable food without expanding any further into the forests. This is indeed quite possible. One of the biggest problems is incredible. We actually waste about 40% of the food that is produced. If we could reduce that food waste, it would go a long, long way to making a more sustainable agricultural system. It's not just about our current lifestyle, but about the education of our children on the way nature works. If we don't act now, the youth of today and the youth of tomorrow are going to look back on this generation with absolute horror. What were you thinking?
We have a moment when we can change our world and make it better. This is a moment.
I do truly believe that together we can create a better future. I might not be here to see it, but if we make the right decisions at this critical moment, we can safeguard our planet's ecosystem, its extraordinary biodiversity, and all its inhabitants. What happens next is up to every one of us.
Don't think you can have much more of a better introduction than that video. It was such a powerful message, but it's very quick and sort of to the point. So I've got a couple more slides on nature because it's important to sort of show what is actually going on and how much we are sort of currently devastating the planet of wildlife, of all life. And as this slide states, non-human life on Earth is really, really suffering at the moment, greatly at our hands. What are the major threats to biodiversity? What can be done to keep our organisms from being lost forever? Are the two sort of major questions to sort of ask yourself. This sort of infographic, if you like, sort of looks at what's in danger, what's being lost. 80% of the decline in biological diversity is caused by habitat destruction. Massive thing that everybody thinks, oh, it's climate change, that's the headline all the time, or possibly pollution, but like habitat destruction is like the first and most major sort of cause of all of this. As you can see, every 20 minutes, the world adds 3,500 human lives and loses one or more species. 27,000 species lost in a year, which is just, well, it's mind-blowing. Every 60 minutes, 240 acres are destroyed, mainly for farming or forestry. And 70% of the world's known species are at risk of extinction if the global temperature rises more than 3.5 degrees. There's a lot more information on there, but you can just see that we're at the point of teetering on no return, and we need to do something about it now. So what's it in the UK? Well, we're known as a green and pleasant land, but that's far from the truth, unfortunately. We're below the global average. We've got less than 70% of our biodiversity left. The chart on there just looks at birds, farmland birds, and you can see that from 1970s going into 1980s, actually we thought we were doing quite well in the 80s, but due to farming practices and use of land use, land management, things are going drastically wrong on our shores as well. And we've all noticed that there's less birds than there was. This sort of proves it, and it's going into, I think, ends at about 2018. Unfortunately for the UK, it means we're 10%, we're in the bottom 10% globally of countries for biodiversity. And that's because we've used a lot of the land and we're just not allowing enough space for nature. The video summed it up really well, what the threats are, but obviously it's nice to have the opportunity to sort of talk about them and sort of look at them. I've already said that habitat loss and degradation is the biggest driver, but of course there's a lot of other primary drivers out there, including invasive species, things like anything from, say, a grey squirrel outpacing, competing, if you like, with the red squirrels is quite a widely talked about thing. But this is going on all over the world with different introduced species, mainly that we've introduced into different countries, that just either sort of outcompetes them or just stops their ecosystem from working. The next biggest one, apart from habitat loss, is overexploitation. So in the seas, fishing is the one that depletes wildlife. Fishing methods like dredging the oceans is just creating a desert on the bottom of our oceans for a quick sort of catch, if you like. We'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. The other half of this presentation, and something that I will concentrate on a lot in a minute, is pollution. So got a few slides about that for you. And of course, probably the place to start with, because this, although it isn't making as much of a difference as habitat loss and overexploitation at the moment, it certainly could be if the predicted rises are going to take place.
Jonathan, can I, before you move on to the next bit?
Of course.
In the film, they talked about how the impacts on nature and biodiversity, however that's called, whether it's caused by climate change or, well, since climate change is accelerated by us anyway. They talked about the nature being denuded, and as a result, the likelihood of more pandemics. I was talking to a friend recently, and they never thought there was any connection between climate change and more pandemics like COVID and other things. So, I mean, have you any thoughts on that yourself?
I don't think that climate change in itself has got, like, it's not what is driving sort of epidemics and stuff like that, but habitat loss, the use of animals, abuse of animals, destruction of animals, making animals sort of go to other places where they weren't sort of used. So obviously they're passing on their diseases, or there's cross issues there. I think that's the main thing. Like the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic could have started in a Chinese wet market, and obviously that's almost as scary. It could have been from a mosquito or whatever, do you know what I mean? But the point being is it could have come from the animal kingdom and might mutated. Just makes you wonder how much more, the more that we take, the more of these diseases that we'll come across. Other diseases may well have come from that sort of cause as well. So it's only going to get worse the more that we push the boundaries and the more we sort of don't respect nature. And I think the habitat loss and the overexploitation is more the driver of pandemics.
Karen, you got your hand up?
Yes, I have, because they were saying that we're starting to get more mosquitoes in this country because of the climate, and we will do, and other creatures that we don't usually have. And obviously mosquitoes and creatures like that spread disease and can make people very ill. And, you know, so the climate can cause more disease, basically.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other thing with climate change, although like we're just about to look at the climate change, is that it's not just animal populations that will change in different countries. It's people populations. As different parts of the world become less habitable, less productive, people will need to move from those places into other countries. So if the government's worried about immigration now, they haven't seen anything yet, I think is one way of putting it. So there are massive pressures associated with climate change. And actually, the next few slides will sort of demonstrate what the tipping points in the climate system are, just to give you an idea of what could be down the road. Because although I'm not saying that climate change is a massive driver now, in the next 20 or 10, 20, 30 years, we could see huge changes through climate change. And the one or two pandemics that we've had so far are of nothing as to what's coming to face us.
I mean, you know, there's obviously how climate change is impacting us in the UK, as well as how it's, you know, impacting across the globe. And I think some people in some areas of the globe would say that they're already getting the really severe ends and the really severe experiences as a result of climate change. We only need to see, you know, some of the disasters, particularly the most recent one in Pakistan. So a lot of what is warned about in terms of natural destruction or nature destruction is already happening in various parts of the world, and not small areas either, in very large areas. Anyway, have you still got your hand up, Karen, or have you finished your question? I'll let Jonathan carry on. Greg put an interesting point on the chat, if people want to have a look at it later, and you may want to say that during this part of the session, Greg.
I think unusually has gone quiet, which is impressive.
Oh, I've just got a few links that I put on the chat about tipping points. It's stuff that I researched before about tipping points. But I also put a link as well to the Wikipedia tipping points in the climate system. It's quite comprehensive, but Jonathan, you're probably going to talk about them now.
I've got a funny feeling you might have seen all this before, Greg, but we'll compare notes afterwards. Okay, shall I move on?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, there we go. Super stuff. So, implications for biodiversity of global warming. 1.5 versus 2 degrees. It doesn't seem a lot, 5 degree, 0.5, half of a degree. But as you can see by this infographic, there's a massive difference. And obviously, if 2 degrees becomes 4 degrees or 3 degrees or 5 degrees, depending on how we take this seriously, you can see that there'll be like the difference will just be exacerbated. So, like looking at coral reefs, for instance, we're expecting with the minimum degrees warming that we're looking at, like the all of the accords are sort of limiting it to, that coral reefs could decline between 70 and 90%. That half a degree will mean coral reefs will be no more. Talking about freak sort of events like what happened in Pakistan, these could happen every year. They could happen on a regular basis. This will be something that country may have to get used to. And if that is the case, then that country will simply not be livable in. So Arctic Ocean ice, currently we're looking every 100 years, the Arctic Ocean is ice free with the 1.5 degrees. If it goes up that half a degree, it's every 10 years. So you can imagine another half degree. It could be every year that there's no ice on that ocean, and then potentially the ramifications for that just build and build. The loss of biodiversity, you can see the insects, plants and vertebrates, like the difference is double just for that half a degree. But of course, what are the tipping points? This is quite a pretty graphic. It just shows you sort of what's coming first. So the light pink, there's a bit at the top, and there's the collapsing coral reefs over there in Australia, are what's going to happen sort of immediately, sort of as the temperature rises. But you can see that actually the next thing along sort of just comes down a bit closer towards the equator, and he's talking some of the areas that currently are wildernesses. So you're affecting the wildernesses of the world, and that's going to be disastrous because obviously there's a lot of life, a lot of biodiversity in there that will be affected and won't be able to cope because we've already used the other parts of the world, destroyed the habitat, so they won't be able to move anywhere. So it's just literally wiping that out. And as you can see, you can go through the different colours there that could make a massive difference, like releasing methane hydrates over there, sort of by China and Japan, will obviously add climate change gases, and exacerbate the situation again. And this is what it means. So you can see between 1 and 3 degrees, the Greenland ice sheet is already melting. I saw something on it the other day that it was just falling, and it's gone back sort of miles already, but you can see that this is going to get worse and worse. Alpine glaciers will disappear, the coral reefs again. But as you go up in temperature, you can see things like the jet stream that keeps our country nice and temperate could stop. If that stops, then we'll have the same weather as Canada does. And far from us thinking that we're all going to be sitting with our sunshades and beers on the beaches, we'll all be sitting there in fluffy jackets for most of the year. It's a whole sort of system of the world that will change. And there we go. There's the Indian summer monsoon that's affected Pakistan. That will be that may stop. It may get worse. It's a complete sort of reversal and change of what we're currently sort of experiencing, and very hard to sort of mitigate against. And of course, just like dominoes falling in a row, if one thing goes, then that's going to increase the likelihood of something else going. So you can see that Arctic sea ice, massive losses, are then going to affect the Atlantic circulation, which has been on a slowdown since the 1950s. It's going to make the permafrost start melting because it's just going to warm the area up. And you can see that there could be more forest fires in the boreal forests in Canada. So you can see that there's a lot of knock-on effects put in a very, very simple way there, but it's quite scary that if one happens, you can see that they are all connected in a very sort of tangible way.
I think the other thing, Jonathan, is with those is the obviously when ice sheets melt wherever they are, often more fresh water goes into the sea level rises, and then obviously we get water encroaching on land. So we've already seen various islands in the Pacific starting to disappear underwater. So and
there's got to be a point where it affects your countries like Belgium and Holland that are below sea level already. that's obviously got a, I don't know, I was going to say dam. It's the dikes around there, and the basically the lady from the nursery rhyme isn't going to be able to stop it with her finger, is she? She's just going to sort of take sort of a massive swathe of Europe, and those people and those animals, particularly the people, have got to go somewhere. And they're, funnily enough, because they are the most fertile lands, if you like, it's a really fertile part of Europe. That's going to affect everything. It's going to really sort of change the way everything sort of works on this continent. And of course, it's going to create wars, and there's going to be a lot of changes going on. What I've tried to do with this presentation is try and make pollution a bit relevant to nature. So there's quite a few slides here on pollution because it's such a wide subject. There may be another video in this as well for you, but it's not quite as intense as the last one, I promise. Of course, what is pollution? To put it very, very basically, and I'm sure we all know what it is, but it's more than just air pollution. It's the pollution of any substance, solid, liquid, or gas, in any form of energy, or of any form of energy such as heat, sound, or radiation, to the environment at a faster rate than it can be dispersed, diluted, decomposed, recycled, or stored in a harmless form. Pollution of all kinds can have negative effects on the environment and on wildlife, and often impacts us and our well-being. And there are some major types of pollution. Air pollution is something that is talked about widely. Water pollution, another one that is being concentrated on. Land pollution, just as serious and can obviously affect both of the other two. And plastic pollution, which is something that's big in the news at the moment because it's something that we can really do something about, and it's really going to sort of affect our oceans. Radioactive heat, noise, and light are also referred to as pollution. On the graphic there, it shows you sort of how pollution works, if you like. So, for instance, you can see where the pollution's coming from on that and where it ends up. Carbon dioxide is obviously the major thing that everybody talks about when they're talking about global warming or carbon dioxide equivalent. But actually, when we're talking about pollution, we're not really talking about carbon dioxide. We're talking about the more corrosive, the more sort of damaging chemicals like nitrous oxides, sulfur dioxides, ammonia, chlorofluorocarbons, particulates. And they can all get into the environment through various chemical sort of manufacturing methods, through transport, through farming, or through us in our households. A lot of it goes into the water, be it from air pollution, then converted by moisture into the atmosphere into acid rain that then goes into the waterways and ultimately ends up in the ocean. A lot of it goes directly into the waterways, and I shall talk more about that in a minute. So air pollution is a major environmental pressure that's felt at a range of scales from local, regional to global. We have air pollution in Northamptonshire, perhaps not as much as they do in China, but certainly it does affect our local environment. Air pollutants can affect biodiversity and ecosystems, harm human health, which is why we have no car zones, low pollution zones, and can contribute to climate change. Air pollution has caused widespread changes to sensitive ecosystems in the UK. Can also affect my vegetables at the allotment. So what are air pollutants? There's numerous pollutants, as you can see coming up on the right hand of your screen there. It's a release of various gases, finely divided solids, or finely dispersed liquid aerosols into the atmosphere. The solids tend to be particulates. They're measured in two ways. You've got fine particulates, PM10s, and ultrafine particulates, which are a quarter of those or below. And then you've got some of the gases that we've all heard about, the nitrogen oxides, the nitrogen dioxides, ozone, which was a big thing that we were talking about a few years ago. I don't know why it's dropped off the thing, it's still there. But things that perhaps you don't know about, like nickel, arsenic, lead. Lead's something that obviously is something that hasn't necessarily sort of dropped off the scale. Some of these particulates have gone up, some of them have gone down as we've sort of had new legislation to try and control them. Others have stayed remarkably similar as we've been going through the different workshops and been talking about them. For instance, the nitrogen dioxides with farming and the ammonia and stuff, that hasn't really been talked about or dealt with.
Jonathan?
Yes.
So can I get you might be coming on to this now, but I could be sitting in Wellingborough and think, well, I've seen all those names and those different chemicals, but actually I don't see any of that in Wellingborough. Do you see what I mean? So how do those things get into the atmosphere in places like Wellingborough? Where are they coming from?
Well, I've got a slide on that, believe it or not, and that's coming up possibly not this next one, but the one after. So yeah, okay. And you'll be surprised sort of what does what. So I've also got other slides trying to explain sort of the differences as we've moved on sort of with different regulations and through different times. So anyway, the point of this screen is that countries cannot tackle air pollution alone. It comes from various different places. Even dust is a pollutant. We get dust from the Sahara Desert in this country, in little old Wellingborough, would you believe? But we do have a lot of farmers around here. They have agricultural practices. Some of the stuff they do isn't as environmentally friendly as it could be. We do have some heavy industry, perhaps not quite as much as we used to, but again, with some of the waste management factories and some of the intensive farming that is proposed, that again is something that is very damaging or potentially very damaging to the environment. And of course, ourselves in our houses, we've had quite a nice warm hot summer, but it's starting to cool down a little bit now, isn't it? So perhaps we're going to start turning on our gas boilers or oil fired if you're living in the country. And of course, that just adds different pollutants and I don't know, chemicals into the environment. But things change. Things change, as I said before, with different acts, different regulations. When I was at school, we were all talking about lead coming out of the back of people's cars and giving children headaches. It did, so they did something about it in 1998 and cut lead out of fuel. Back before the Clean Air Act in 1956, we had all the steam trains, everything was coal powered. Right up until the 70s, we were called the dirty old man of Europe in this country. So there was a lot of sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. And our cities were famed for having smogs. In fact, it still happens in China, as their rules haven't sort of changed like ours have. But things move on and don't necessarily get any better. For instance, you wouldn't have got the same particulates in 1956 as you do now. We wouldn't have had the diesel cars pumping out fine particulates. We wouldn't have had so many car tires being driven around and the bits of tire going into the atmosphere and potentially being breathed in by people walking around on the pavements. So although we've changed the amount of stuff that we're doing, the amount of vehicles and miles that we're doing, still is very polluting. And as David Attenborough or one of his colleagues said on the video, the heavy industry that we did have in this country that produced all that soot has just literally been moved to a different country like China or India. So they're suffering the same problems that we had 50 years ago, but we're still responsible for that pollution, and it's still affecting planet on this earth, life on this earth. That's the slide that you wanted, Marion. So this sort of shows you, with comparing 5 different pollutants, where they come from. So as you can see, they're not all the same, obviously. For instance, energy industries, you can see there's a lot of sulfur dioxide coming out of energy industries. That's because they burn a lot of fossil fuels. So for instance, countries that burn a lot of coal will have a higher sulfur dioxide sort of emission than countries that either use gas or, even better, obviously, renewables to generate their electricity. The ones on here that are the big drivers, if you like, are highlighted in orange. So the volatile organic compounds, you can see that industrial processes account for over half of those. Whereas if you compare their sort of nitrogen oxides, it's very, very small. But then look at road transport for your nitrogen oxides, more than a third is coming from road transport. And like I said in the last slide, that wasn't such a thing back in 1956 or the 1980s, because it was there wasn't as much road transport about. But again, we're looking at ways to sort of change that, to move more to electric based. But unless we change the source of the electricity, as we've already sort of had a workshop on, we're still producing those pollutants, just in a different way. You'll have less nitrogen oxides, but you might have more sulfur dioxides. Agriculture's an interesting one. Again, we've done a workshop on it, but you can see that ammonia there, agriculture is responsible for nearly 90% of ammonia production. Even your house, just using wood burners, sort of something that was, and burning sort of biomass, was something that was really pushed a few years ago. You can see that just by burning sort of biomass, wood stoves or whatever, you can see that fine particulates, the ultra fine particulates, residential and small scale commercial combustion is responsible for nearly half of that. It's a range of things, but it does need a range of solutions to deal with it. And what are we doing in Wellingborough and Northamptonshire, and Northamptonshire as a whole, to monitor and measure this? Well, to be honest with you, in the last sort of 5 years or so, not a lot. But in the first half of the 2010s, you can see that Wellingborough Town, the Borough Council of Wellingborough measured them, and they measured them in a variety of locations, and found that certain areas were more polluted than other areas. You can see that this is nitrogen dioxide, mainly caused by cars, and you can see that the figures hadn't really changed year on year, and the areas that were as polluting in 2011 were still as polluting, if not worse, by 2015. So something that the then leader of the council, Martin Griffiths, said is that just outside Sheep Street and the council offices down at Croyland, Swanspool House, that was the most polluted part of the town. And this graph shows you that's got 35 nanograms per meter cubed. Compare that with St Barnabas Street, which is a fairly quiet school street just round the corner from me, funnily enough, and it's less than half because not as much traffic goes down there. But interesting, you look at that and you think some of the rural places like Sirewell, for instance, you'd expect that possibly to be lower than perhaps a mid sort of town centre sort of street. No, because of course you've still got sort of cars and that going through, and they're being used in a different way. They're not just sort of pootling through. They're used perhaps at higher speeds. So it's quite interesting to sort of look at that. I do sort of wonder how Swanspool House is considerably lower than Sheep Street, bearing in mind there's about 200 yards between the two. But I'm guessing that's at the back of Swanspool House. So it's quite good if you were getting married there during that time. You'd have had a bit cleaner air at the back there, but there we go. That's interesting to see.
The Sirewell one, obviously, it depends where it's read within Sirewell, because if it's on that road, you know, that cuts from Wellingborough to Northampton at the back,
yeah,
obviously that gets a lot of traffic that goes along by the airport. But so I suppose it just depends where these readings are being taken, doesn't it?
I think they've tried to sort of do it as clearly as possible, but the one that stands out that is quite difficult to sort of judge is the Sirewell one, because obviously if it was in a field sort of away from the airport and the road, you would expect that to be a lot lower. So you'd have to expect that to be fairly close to either the airport or road, or possibly both, to be such a high reading. But like I say, I was surprised when I first saw it when they just described it as rural background.
Jonathan,
sorry, Marion, go on.
Obviously, we don't know. I mean, you're showing us this chart, but I wouldn't, if you'd asked me, I mean, obviously I can see that one figure's higher than another, but how do those figures compare with, say, a national average or a regional average? You know, so how does, for example, Elsdon Road's score in 2015 compare with a road in Northampton? Or do you see what I mean? Do you have any comparison?
You can see that on the sort of the menu, if you like, at the top there, you can see what is not to be exceeded. So, for instance, these are annual means, and the way they do it, they take a percentage off of the actual read amount. So, for instance, that 31 would have read 41. So they're taking 20-25% off of that to actually make it fair. But they would do that with the annual mean of the 40. But if they're looking at 40 as the maximum, you can see that 31's like 3/4 of the way there. This chart doesn't tell you that on a particular day it was particularly bad, because they're only giving you the figures for like the annual mean, and that 200 is obviously quite high. You'd expect somewhere like London or potentially in the middle of Northampton to give a closer average to be higher. So nothing there is kind of screaming out and saying it's a really dangerous place to live. If it was more than 40 on this chart, then obviously we'd be a lot more worried. But still, because of the idling traffic that's going through the town centre, and because Sheep Street is basically the road that goes through the town centre, and that is where the majority of shoppers congregate in Wellingborough, potentially the place with the most amount of people is also the most polluted part of the town. So you could argue that if we were going to do something to improve health and safety for people in this town, that we should stop traffic from using the road between the bottom of Sheep Street, i.e. the multi-storey car park, and where Oxford Street joins into the one-way system by Morrison's. And that would obviously reduce the pollution and the exposure to people using the shops in the town centre. This tells you what it does to you. So nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, ozone gets into your lungs and irritates you. Basically, it increases symptoms for those suffering from lung diseases. Fine particulates can be carried deep into the lungs. In fact, they've been found in most animals throughout the world, be they in the sea or whatever, with post-mortems, because once a fine particulate is in your system that way, it's in your system. If they're in your lungs, they cause inflammation and a worsening of heart and lung diseases, because it can, just like carbon monoxide, reduce the uptake of oxygen into the blood. Carbon monoxide, which is why most of us have got a carbon monoxide detector in our house, can be instantly fatal. But at lower levels, it can still significantly affect the supply of oxygen to your heart, and particularly people suffering with heart disease and lung diseases. So it's not sort of little things that we're sort of just saying, not in this town sort of thing. It's really serious stuff that can hurt you and can obviously kill you. But according to the World Health Organization, this is what it can do to you. It's from being in your mum to being old age. Asthma is a big one. So years ago, you didn't get as many people with asthma unless you had people that were unfortunate to sort of live with chain smokers. Now we're sort of all focused, all sort of suffering with pollution. A lot more people are getting asthma. But even before you're born, you could come out with a smaller head and have a lower birth weight, sort of at term. When you're growing up, you could have smaller lungs, and obviously that's just going to affect how you grow and how you grow up. There's a posh word for that, but I couldn't remember it. But particularly, obviously, if you're already suffering, if you've got a disease or if you're old, you are more susceptible to it. So it affects the young, but it affects the old people as much. And it's been linked to things like brain diseases, poor cognition, heart attacks, failures and strokes, which is why you tend to have limits around sort of schools, obviously, but also areas where there are concentrations of older people. And of course, as the last slide said, it can accelerate any lung conditions that you've got. Moving on from air pollution, if I may, water pollution is something that was possibly more obvious in the olden days, when you used to see sort of oil floating around on the Thames and it glimmering. But actually, it's probably worse now, because a lot of it is in there, be it particulates, plastic, or sort of chemicals. And as you can see by the words on the side there, that we're fast approaching tipping points, according to the Office for Environmental Protection. We're looking at tipping points in a lot of our sort of waterways, where a gradual decline suddenly becomes catastrophic, i.e. loss of wildlife, fisheries collapse, dead and polluted rivers. A programme that I watched on Channel 4 the other day was just showing the water companies, mainly through stormwaters, being caught up in the sewage works and flushing it all into the rivers, of rivers that were either littered with plastic and different debris that had come out of these sewage traces, or were just lined with, for a better word, poo. Is that they're just a brown or even green algae that sort of developed over time, and obviously there's no fish or anything in there. They're just dead streams, so completely changed the ecosystem and wiped out any life in there. And actually, even for the ones that are sort of coping to a certain extent with this, there will be a time when it just clicks and then that river's dead too. So it's a really sort of, it's time to change, basically. It's time for Ofwat to sort of start being funded properly and to start having some teeth that can actually do something about this, rather than just accepting the figures that these water companies give them. So this describes where water pollution comes from. It's in the atmosphere, as I said before, particulates mixed with the carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides, and form a weak acid. This is where acid rain comes from. More air pollution means that water vapor absorbs more of these gases and becomes even more acidic. And when it rains, these water is polluted with these gases, and this is called acid rain. Of course, water pollution comes from factories, from industrial processes that can include metals and solvents, like the iron oxide in this stream just here. Pesticides from farming to control weeds, insects and fungi. And of course, petrol can come from various processes and also from spillages. This is something that I touched on earlier, so I won't say it again, but as you can see, these are the various regional companies in the UK. We are Anglian in Northamptonshire. South West, I believe, has just had a massive fine from Ofwat, but there's an awful lot that isn't being reported because most of the figures, as I said before, are self reported. So you see there's a lot of fertilizer and stuff in the water that can contaminate the water and clog filters. And of course, if you've got a lot of algae there, it's going to take up the oxygen, leaving none for surrounding organisms. Some pollutants don't dissolve in the water because the molecules are either too big or they're inert. This is called particulate matter, just the same as if it's in the air. It can often be a cause of water pollution. Suspended particles eventually settle to cause a thick salt. I think I described that as poo earlier. This can be particularly harmful to marine life that lives on the floor, but can also kill anything else that sort of would have been growing to oxygenate the water. Biodegradable substances are often suspended in the water and can cause problems by increasing the amount of anaerobic microorganisms present. I will get my teeth in. And toxic chemicals, like was in the picture before, can also be harmful to the development and survival of aquatic life. Something that we do at Wellingborough and Wellingborough Eco Group is pick up quite a lot of litter, and litter can be a massive issue in waterways and the sea because it doesn't go away very quickly, and of course it's competing for space with all sorts of other life. So litters like a six-pack can be caught around land animals as well as it could be caught around sea animals. As you can see by the sort of infographic there, some things can almost live forever in the sea, that you'll put them in there today and your grandchildren's grandchildren will still sort of suffer from the result of that in their lifetime. And it's not sort of something that hasn't been reported. Fairly recently, these two stories were put on the press. So big thing that came out recently is that a lot of sewage is being dumped into our waterways and in our beaches. I remember going to Great Yarmouth and swimming quite nicely until I realised what was floating past me was actually somebody's dinner, if you like. But anyway, we don't need to go into that. The UK in Europe is particularly bad at this. Our waters aren't great, second only in worseness, if you like, to Poland. Now, land pollution is fairly obvious, and it's not quite so obvious. So things like rubbish obviously pollute the land, but things like compost and other toxins dump onto the land will contaminate and pollute it. Land pollution is caused by humans, such as littering and waste washed ashore from boats, oil rigs and sewage treatment plants. The degradation of Earth's land surfaces for above and below level surface is referred to as land pollution, and it accumulates in the soil as either a solid waste or liquid waste, and can also be passed on to groundwater and in the soil as it's the cause. So here are some land polluting things. The obvious are heavy metals. Like so, there's another example there of heavy metals such as arsenic, cadmium, lead. Oils and tars are very obvious, both on water and on land. Chemical substances and preparations that have been illegally dumped. Gases, would you believe, are very present on the land. Asbestos, and also radioactive materials, be they low level from healthcare or obviously from nuclear power stations. And there's somebody trying to eke a living in one of the poorer countries of the world, but over 75% of the Earth area is degraded. And unfortunately, it's only going to get worse. It's estimated to rise to up to 95% by 2050. And some 3.2 billion people are negatively affected by contaminated land. Plastic pollution is something that's really being shouted out at the moment. And it can be as simple as flushing an earbud down the loo, as to people dropping stuff over the side of a boat, or just litter, be it either from councils not collecting the litter from bins, or just dropping off of lorries as you're going along, or people just dropping it as they're walking around. It's very cheap plastic and it's durable and it's easy to produce. But you can see that like 8 million pieces of plastic entering the oceans every single day is something that is completely unsustainable. I think I touched on this before, but just like particulates in animals, bits of plastic has been seen in every corner of the world, including the deepest oceans and on uninhabited islands. Dolphins, turtles, seabirds, seals can all be entangled in large pieces of plastic. Microplastics are swallowed and it's just as devastating by anything from zooplankton to giant blue whales. And they can enter the food chain and cause, when they're degraded, into harmful toxins. Microplastics have even been found in your poo. And obviously, the various campaigning groups have been highlighting this. Greenpeace in the Philippines did quite a remarkable demonstration of this by making a whale and filled it with plastic, just to show on a very graphic scale that this particular whale scoops up everything, and if it's plastic, it scoops that up too. And a lot of animals do mistake this for food. Here's that video I promised you.
There is no greater duty for any nation than protecting our people and our planet. The UK government is a global leader in tackling plastic pollution, and we can be incredibly proud of what we are doing. Plastic steroids and plastic compounds to make sure that we turn the tide. Well, Do we wake up to the damage being done to the environment? The plastic that is dumped. Look, sure the very health of the planet for our children, grandchildren, and generations to come.
So that was, I think, possibly the most powerful thing to show you. It's a real, it looks funny, but it really isn't, whether you consider that much plastic is being dumped on other countries just by this country every single day. And good way to finish off pollution, I think. I'm just going to quickly dive into other threats, including habitat loss and exploitation. The first video did cover this well. So this is another infographic that just gives you an idea of this. I'm just going to mute for 5 seconds because my 4-year-old shouting at me. So as you can see by this, we talked about overexploitation of the oceans. 85% of ocean fisheries are categorized as either fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted. And talking about habitat loss, 50% of the Earth's wetlands were destroyed in the 20th century. But also you've got some examples there of invasive species and also examples of black market demands, poachers, if you like. Here we go, the button did work, fantastic. And this is another one of those infographics that just tells you sort of how different types of animals, different animal kingdoms are affected by different things. It's surprising to see that birds and reptiles, amphibians are affected more by almost 50% by habitat degradation than anything else. And the next biggest thing on there, fish unsurprisingly being part of that, is exploitation, i.e. overfishing in the seas. And as I was talking about earlier, climate change at the moment is a relatively small amount on that graph, but if we get to the tipping points that we were all talking about earlier, that will be massively exacerbated as temperatures rise.
I suppose, Jonathan, when you're thinking about fish, their habitat degradation is the sea, and overexploitation is, you know, their habitat is being destroyed within the sea, isn't it? So it's
exactly that. Yeah, like when you trawl,
actually, it's habitat degradation as well as them being trawled to death.
It is, yeah, but like I say, habitat degradation sort of accounts for the trawling that basically scrapes the bottom of the sea clean. Mm. But exploitation is where they've been overfished or hunted. There's a lot of different creatures in this world that are hunted either for sport or for food or for one reason or another. And you can see that actually, far from it being sort of just a casual jolly, if you like, a lot of people think, it's making a massive difference on the planet's biodiversity. And of course, we're looking at exploitation, including things like logging and stuff like that. It's not just sort of hunting and fishing. It is degrading them, but that's also exploitation. So it's a little bit mixed up. But if you just included the yellow and the burgundy ones there, you can see that some are like 70–75% before you even start talking about invasive species pollution or climate change. And this is what our world looks like today. This was actually in the video, but I thought that it was important to show you it and kind of concentrate on it. Because actually, like, as I was talking to before, right in the centre of the picture there is us, our UK. And it's got more as a percentage of any country in the world of highly damaged areas compared to anybody, like possibly apart from the Benelux countries. But you can see where the bits that are left are obviously in danger as well. You've got Canada, Australia, Russia, and Brazil. And we all know about Brazil chopping down their rainforests. But the same's happening in Siberia. And obviously Australia haven't got a particularly great record, dare I say, Greg, looking after their natural lands. But what about little old Wellingborough and Northamptonshire? Well, these two maps on the side here, because I'm a bit of a map fan, show you what Wellingborough was like in 1919 and what Wellingborough was like in 2019. The difference, as you can see, is where I'm just sort of hoovering my cursor there is where I live, on that corner there, and I would have been on the edge of the town. If I go down now to where my house is, which is just here, I'm actually now in the middle of the town. So you can see that although, yes, the Northants Development Corporation did have a lovely advertising campaign in the early 2010s calling our part of the country North Londonshire, in order to try and sell all the houses that they were going to build in our area. We've actually been a London overspill for many years, starting with the Kingsway estate down here, which is all brand new, moving on to the Queensway estate, which is slightly later, and then other areas of the town up here. So the town has almost grown sort of fivefold, with the new development of this area here being developed, and also this area here being developed, and this little pocket here also being developed. They're actually thinking of adding an extra third again to our town, or actually doing it, because a lot of it's already been built in the last couple of 3 years. So they're adding another third onto the town again. And this is all to find enough space for another 100,000 people over 15 years. Similar developments are going on in Corby, some in Kettering, and crikey, I'm sure that Harry will tell us all about the ones in Northampton, because they've not exactly sort of let Northampton off the hook either. But lots of development, lots of warehouses going on, green fields. For instance, there's something called Staunch, a campaign by people in Titchmarsh and Thrapston to try and stop any more warehouses being built on farming land up there. But
Jonathan,
yes.
the other interesting thing about these two maps, so we looked at the Wellingborough growth, but also you look to the right. So if you compare in 1919 the size of Rushton, Irchester, Irthlingborough, Hyam Ferris, etc., and now look at it, well, not even now, because obviously there has been even more built. And then there's warehouses, as well as housing coming to the east of Wellingborough, there's warehouses coming into the east of Wellingborough. So massive growth in both areas, just within a few miles of each other. I mean, pretty much the whole of that, that upper Nen Valley part is now connected.
Yeah, and that was something that when I started campaigning for the Green Party back in sort of probably 2005, I was trying to campaign against, and we were talking then about the development plans, meaning that we're going to connect Rushton right the way through Wellingborough to Northampton, and it just being one big town. And that's just basically what's happening, isn't it? We might have some swathes of land where there's a little bit of this, but of course what it's doing is stopping food production, but more importantly, if you like, displacing nature. Something that I campaigned against and wasn't very popular for doing was the Rushton Lakes development, because that was an old ski slope that was covered in sort of wildlife. It is no more. And yes, they've done something to sort of restore some of the areas around there, but they've done a lot more to not help nature, I think is the nicest way of putting it. It's interesting on this map that all of these sort of lighter colours here are warehouses. So you can see that these are all warehouses. I was originally going to show the whole of Northamptonshire, but I think it was more impactful showing like Wellingborough and Rushton and the massive differences that have been here. We may be having a 4-year-old joining us.
We have some more coffee, so
You can go upstairs. I'll be finished in about 20 minutes. Okay, solutions. I'm going to quickly whiz through these because I do want to allow time, and I've probably almost gone past it already. Just to show what can be done. Now, there's an awful lot of words on this screen, and I promise I won't read them all out to you, but they do give you some really good sort of things that could be done to aid conservation. It's basically saying that we need to look after the protected areas more, conserve wildlife more outside of the protected areas, to invest in habitat restoration and strengthen nature networks, ensure outcomes for nature are integrated in our development plans at land and sea, tackle atmospheric pollution and water pollution, especially from nitrogen and ammonia, because, as I said before, farming, a lot of work has been done to tackle pollution, but farming has pretty much stayed a constant. Deploy nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation, develop the UK's evidence base to prove that the things that we're doing will work, and adopt targets to become more nature positive. But of course, that's all good, but we need to do more than just conservation if we're going to come out this the other side. We've all, throughout these workshops, we've looked at what it was like in the 1970s and the decline of nature and the increase of pollution and all of the other things that have happened in the last sort of, 50 years. This is what's happened to nature. You can see it's on a spiral, not on a spiral, on a downward trend. The next stage, if you like, and this is taking it from 2010, because I must admit this was the prettiest graphic I could find, is up to us. So if we just did the conservation efforts, we're still going to be a lot worse off. If we carried on as we are, basically there's going to be nothing left. But what we do need to do is do all of those conservation things and be more sustainable, both in production and consumption. And this is the difference that will be made again by 2050, like the last graphic showed. And this is habitat loss. This isn't necessarily species loss. This is habitat loss. So if we carry on as we are, we're going to lose another almost 6% of habitat. Bearing in mind, we're already sort of lost about 75 already. But if we can sort of optimize trade, that reduces it slightly. Half food waste, knocks it down by nearly 2%. If we can adopt healthier diets, i.e. not eating as much meat and dairy, close yield gaps, we do everything, we're almost on a par. And what about Northamptonshire? And what are we doing over here then? There's 734 wildlife sites in Northamptonshire, apparently, forming a network of natural sites supporting species and biodiversity across the county. 734 sounds loads. Obviously, some can be like somebody's back garden, and some can be big things like Summerlees. But of all of these, this just covers 5% of the county. Here's a map of some of the big ones for you. Charities like the Wildlife Trust in Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire, which look after Northamptonshire, would like at least 30% of our land, not 5%, 30% of our land and sea to be connected and protected for nature's recovery in the next sort of 10 years, so by 2030. As that says, making more space for nature will make it more abundant and give wildlife a chance to recover. It'll also store carbon and help us to tackle the climate crisis. Get me words out in a minute. Do apologise. Other charities, other groups are doing things. Nenscape is one that's particularly active along the River Nen. Do quite a lot sort of in Wellingborough to Northampton up to Peterborough. They're looking at different ways and different opportunities to develop new things as well. So they've got a Secure the Fund scheme, which can secure grants for farmers and landowners to protect and improve fishing practices, and a scheme for river restoration works. Myself and Harry were talking about this a minute ago. On Saturday, the Big Green Week starts off, and it's all about tackling climate change and protecting nature. So between the 24th of September, i.e. this Saturday, and then the following Sunday on the 2nd of October, the Great Big Green Week will unleash a wave of support for action to protect our planet. Yes, I did copy that off the website. You can go to their website and register all the things that you're doing. We currently in Northamptonshire don't have anything registered, which is strange because Wellingborough Eco Group are doing a host of things at the Eco Hub at Glamis Hall. On Saturday, we've got a climate cafe, as well as our monthly 2-hour tidy up, our litter pick. We've got a repair and repurpose day Monday, our usual food sharers swap shop on Tuesday, and then a host of activities, including a vegan picnic. There are lots to talk about, but I am very aware that I'm running out of time. And I will ask Harry to describe what he's doing after the presentation. So, good news is, that's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any questions, do ask, or email if you can think of anything in the future. Obviously, all the information, as Marion led with to start off with, is on our website, which is wcap.org.uk. And if you're watching this on a recording, you can zap that QR code and it will take you straight to the website.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Thanks very much. That's very comprehensive. I do want to talk about a few things in a minute, but I just want to ask, has anybody got any questions after Jonathan's presentation? Any thoughts, comments, observations?
Would you like to say what you're doing next week, Harry? Because you did say in the break, and I think it was only me and Greg that were listening to you.
Well, yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So Climate Action West Northamptonshire is looking at the world in terms of the basics of life. So we've got projects on air quality. We're monitoring air quality in various locations. We've been doing it for a couple of years. In terms of water, so we've got air, water, food and shelter as our basics of life. We aren't doing a great deal on water, I have to say. We're looking for people who are in our area who would be keen to go kicking mud in streams and seeing what creatures there are there, and kind of generally taking over where DEFRA has given up on, or the Environment Agency have given up on looking after our water courses. We've got a lot of small streams and we've no idea how polluted they are, or we just need to start monitoring those. In terms of air, water, food, we're doing on each of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're doing one of those topics. For food, we've got one of our people is a former farmer. He's talking about food waste and the change that we've seen over the last 50 years from small farms to big farms, from greengrocers to supermarkets. I don't want to give it all away or else you won't turn up. And we're doing quite a big thing. We had a fuel poverty workshop at the beginning of the year, and it's kind of been overtaken by the reality of the cost of keeping ourselves warm in winter. So we've got something called a building resilience project that we've launched at the we're launching this month anyway. So basically I've got my visual aids here. We've got smoke pens, we've got infrared camera, we've got anyway, just a general plan to help householders look at where they're losing energy and help communities to come together to identify the kinds of homes that they've got in their parish or up their street, and the kinds of things that are appropriate to make them more energy efficient. We see heat pumps and insulation as being the buzzwords that politicians use without any recognition that A, we can't afford it, and B, for many of the traditional homes across Northamptonshire, banging on external insulation is just not an option. These stone-built homes, you can't insulate them from the outside. So we are looking at assessing, with the cooperation of 5 parishes, the sorts of things that we find in those 5 parishes, and we'll be producing a report in February, March, summarizing what we've found. And so basically at the moment we've got 174,000 households in West Northamptonshire. The energy performance certificates that have been lodged suggest that 100,000 of them are poorly performing in terms of energy efficiency, which is a huge challenge for anyone to have to tackle, and certainly the individual homeowners or tenants are just going to struggle to improve them. We need to improve, not just to save money, but because anywhere between 20 and 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions is coming from keeping ourselves warm in winter. So we've got to reduce the wastage, we've got to reduce the heat losses. Anyway, so that's the shelter bit. And then what citizen participation can achieve. We've got a lot of people saying, well, it's the council's job. And of course, to an extent, it is the council's job to look after the bigger picture, but it's also down to citizens to do something. So we've got a kind of citizen day on Friday. And on Sunday, the 2nd, the Northamptonshire Natural History Society, they've got a premises in the centre of Northampton. They're putting on a report of climate weather over the last 170 years to show the trends. That's what we're doing for the Great Big Green Week, and they're all on Zoom. And I think there's an Eventbrite link somewhere, and I've no idea where it is, so I do apologise.
I'm sure
if I can forward you the link, Jonathan, Marion, if you wanted to share it with your group, that would be great. And we're going to record the whole lot, and they'll be, as you are doing, they'll be available to look for years and years to come.
Thanks very much, Holly. Thank you. I did want to do a little section now, but we've run out of time, but I just want to mention it anyway, and then maybe we can discuss it next time. As part of the work we've been doing for the Wellingborough Climate Action Project, we're all constantly on the lookout for funds to help support the actions that we're doing, and hopefully maybe support actions other people are doing as well. So we recently had a look at the National Lottery to see if they were doing anything to help people that are taking climate action. And I just want to show you something in respect of that, if I can share the screen. So I've been reading this. This is National Lottery have set up a fund called Climate Action Fund, and there aren't many grants available, but they're looking for communities to create partnerships and come up with nature-based actions and projects that can push forward around climate action in both rural areas and urban areas. So I'm just showing you this page. We can put this in our materials that we put out afterwards. So I'll just stop for a minute, stop sharing that. There's a lot of money available for communities that can come up with a really good plan about how to link action together to do with sustaining nature. And I thought, given that we were talking about nature tonight, it would be good to spend a bit of time, maybe next session, actually thinking, well, what sort of nature projects could we come up with? They don't have to be just based in one town or one community. We could look at a project that actually goes through parts of Northamptonshire to see with different groups and different organisations to see how we can come up with a pioneering project that the National Lottery would be interested in. Something, and in a way, you know, we might think, well, our communities and our county is quite ordinary, but actually, you know, our county and our communities need to be taking more action, which is what we started the Climate Action Project in Wellingborough. And if we can come up with a model that other people can use, it would be all to the good. So I think I'd invite everybody to have a think about, if you could wave your magic wand, and there's potential to do that, because there's quite a lot of money in this this bid, what sort of actions do you think we could take in our communities that support nature or enhance nature, but also benefit our journey in terms of turning back the climate change, the climate transition, or adapting to that change? So how, if we could maybe, yeah, I've got it here, if we could wave our magic wand.
I knew that was coming.
If we could wave our magic wand and change stuff. We saw a lot of pictures that Jonathan showed us tonight of how things could be, well, some things of how things could be. There's a lot of how it actually is. So what would we do? And you know, there's potentially quite a lot of financial resource available to help us to take some of this action. So, you know, if we can't imagine it, how can we create it? So maybe it's thinking about, well, what sort of things would we like to imagine? What sort of things would we love to achieve in our communities? And I did want the 15 minutes tonight to really just sort of ask you those questions. So, I mean, it's 9 o'clock now. We can either stop at this point and think about it and come back and discuss it next time, or we could take 15 minutes now to do this. So it's entirely up to everyone here. What do you think?
Harry's got his hand up, but it's not his thumb up. I'm not sure what that means, but I think he'd like to start the conversation. Is Jean? I don't know. I think we're. Would you like to sort of stay a bit longer, Jean, and Judy?
You're muted, Jean. We can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I should have to go, but it's been very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
So maybe, unless anybody else is burning, I mean, I'm happy to stay for 15 minutes, but otherwise we could have a discussion about this. And I think I'll ask Jonathan to add the link to that grant page on our materials for this session, and just invite you all to start thinking, because there is a lot we can do. There are some limitations, you know, I'm aware of that. But what can we start to do that actually helps in a very practical way, or in many practical ways?
Even if we are talking,
Harry would like to go first. He's had his hand up for ages. That's okay, Judy.
Sorry, I just want to say very quickly that we've got this concept of shovel-ready applications, a bit like that former Prime Minister wanted to talk about shovel-ready projects. We come across grant opportunities and then we spend forever thinking about what we might do. And I think it's a good practice to, exactly as you're proposing, it's what we've been doing, which is to think of all the things we could do and then allocate a task for someone to actually work that up as a proposal, so that when the grant opportunity arrives, you don't have to spend 10 days intensively getting the proposal together. You can just put forward whatever it is that you've got, maybe tailor it slightly to address the grant objectives. But it's just having half a dozen projects mulling round, because people suddenly find that they've got a few £1,000 and it's going to go back in the pot or get lost if there's no application. So I was just saying that as far as West Northampton is concerned, we are building up that bucket load of thinking that you're about to embark upon, and I think you should really cast your net as wide as possible, because there is money out there, and if you've got all the references that support your application, then you're going to be more successful than if you just think, oh, that sounds good, let's knock something up quickly. Sorry, that's all I wanted to say. I apologize.
Yeah, I think this, I'll come back to you in a second, Judy, sorry.
That's okay.
The good thing with this fund that we could go for is that you can do a bid that might be a development bid, and I don't mean developing houses, I mean developing an idea, a plan, as well as then going for funding afterwards, which is actually bringing that plan to fruition. So so that's something we can look at. But and also I can see how we could bring lots of different pieces together under that banner, because the sort of volume of money we can go for is quite significant. So you're talking somewhere, I mean, the development fund is between 50 and 150,000. The actual project fund is being between 300 and 500,000. So they're not tiny pieces of money, but they do require organisations to create partnerships to help bring about change. So it's not one or two organisations that could go for it necessarily. I mean, maybe if there were big organisations, but it needs to be at least a few organisations working together on it. Judy, you were going to say something.
Well, no, I was really just going to say that, you know, although I'm happy to stay now, you know, probably it would be good to sort of put some thought to it and talk about it next time anyway.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, we've started to have a think, but I think, I mean, I wouldn't mind doing a sort of session, maybe outside of the workshops, session for an hour to just really knock a few ideas together, think about all the stuff we've identified and learned throughout these workshops. And, you know, if the universe gave us this magic wand and said, right, you've identified lots of stuff, what are you going to do to fix it, or what are you going to do to change it, then, you know, let's, but it is obviously about what we can do in our area with our access. I mean, one of the things around the nature challenges is that if you look at that page, and we'll make sure you can access it, some of the projects that other people have done have been like, you know, in a way like the Nenscape work that Jonathan mentioned, where they were doing work along a whole stretch of river. But clearly we as a community of people can do some of that, but we've got a number of issues around access to spaces and control of those spaces. So how do we come up with something whereby we can access that? I mean, you know, and I'm looking at yourself here, Greg. Not that you're the power that bees within Northamptonshire Council, but you know, obviously a big landowner within this area is North Northampton Council. So there's a possibility of working collaboratively with them. And I see that North Northampton Council has just had a green award for a particular initiative. It's been operated, I think, in Desborough. But there's also, you know, if we can't get the councils on board, what can we do anyway? And you know, so anyway, I'm happy to maybe schedule a session if anybody wants to come along and join that, because I think this is a really good opportunity. We're getting a head of steam together from the work that we're doing, both here in Wellingborough, also the group in West Northampton, and trying to add to that. I mean, and going for funding has been good. One thing just to feed onto you as well, and I can talk about it a bit more next time, is that, you know, a few weeks ago we had a discussion about what next after the climate action project. And well, what we'd like to, you know, I'll talk about some of this next week, but we have managed to secure some funding to a small amount of funding, and we've gone for some other funding as well. So we've managed to secure some funding to train up at least one of us. We're hoping to have some funds to train two of us to become domestic energy assessors, non-domestic energy assessors, and to create an energy advice and climate action service coming out of the Eco Hub from January, so that we can do some of the stuff that Harry was talking about a minute ago, whereby we can provide general advice to people about ways of saving energy and maybe retrofitting their homes or taking action. But we can also provide specific advice for people about their specific home, or hopefully going forward, their specific place of work as well. And we're also talking with the local business network to create a range of workshops for them to help local businesses start to create their own carbon reduction and sustainability plans, map their footprints and start taking action. You know, and all of this is coming from the work that we've been able to do as part of the climate action project, some of which I don't mention very much, which is the work that Glamis Hall has been doing. It is where we've created this carbon reduction and sustainability plan for Glamis Hall. Glamis Hall has now been able to get a small amount of funding to help bring that to life and implement it, and then to pay for some of us to train to be able to be part of an energy advice service going forward, because that big gap is people knowing what the hell to do, you know, apart from then having the money to do it. You know, that's the next bit, isn't it? So that stuff we're starting to develop, but I hope by the end of this, you know, next time when we meet, we can talk also about maybe getting this climate action forum set up within the area. And I mean, it probably a Wellingborough one, but absolutely, I'm quite happy anybody wants to come, and then we learn together and then start launching them in our own areas. But yeah, so can I just ask, Greg, you mentioned about your suggestion to Sally from the town council at the beginning of the meeting. Is that what you're suggesting to her? What are you suggesting to her? Just to create a, you know, maybe I should just ask you, what was your suggestion to her again?
Sally sent me a summary of the conversations that she had with us. Yeah. And one of the suggestions there from the Wellingborough Town Council was to look at the possibility of setting up a community hub for climate change and sustainability matters in Wellingborough, and perhaps having an organization like the Wellingborough Eco Group manage that. But I've only put that idea forward. There's no promises that anything will happen from that, but I just need to find out a mechanism for how that will work, because as with all of these things, we can wave a magic wand and say, oh yeah, we like that, but in reality, certain things have to be done in certain ways and be agreed by certain people in certain places to enable such things, and it can be a lengthy process. But I quite like the idea of what you guys are doing with the EPC stuff. I think that's a very brave step, but I think it's very sensible because it goes into the sustainability side of what you're doing. So I want to wish you all the best with that.
Thank you. Just to say to everybody as well, the Wellingborough Town Council, I mean, I haven't seen the papers yet. We've got our full council meeting next Wednesday. And I know that, well, Sally said to me the other day that she'd done a report to feed back to the council about the work that it started back in January, which, you know, I put forward a motion then. And that, so that will hopefully be in the papers for next week. And then if it is being discussed, obviously any resident can come along and watch and see and have your say if you want to have a say about it. At the moment, I can't tell you what's in that paper. I haven't seen it, but I was hoping I'd get to see it before tonight's meeting, but I haven't. So hopefully, hopefully we'll be pleased with whatever she's suggesting, because I think she's suggesting further actions, but I don't know what they are at the moment. So maybe that's something, if you keep an eye on Wellingborough Town Council's website for the agendas for next Wednesday's full council meeting. And if you feel inspired, then please register and come and speak, because actually we don't get hardly anybody coming to speak from the public. And it'd be nice to hear someone other than me speaking about climate action work. So yeah, so there's a lot starting to happen. I mean, obviously the Eco Hub is already starting, and it's starting to find its own way. It started in the last couple of weeks, and hopefully I think, obviously I'm not able to go, not obviously, but I'm not able to go to the Eco Hub very often at the moment. But we're hopeful that as well as being up on Queensway, we would get a chance to come down into the town centre and maybe, well, go to other events around the town to tell people about the work of the Eco Hub, and it starts to expand. But there's been a lot of beavering going back to Harry's point about getting a list of jobs to go for grants. We're getting quite adept at that now, and we're going for lots of different pots of money. We're still waiting to hear from some of them, but we know things take time, but the more we can sort of do things together, the better, really. Are there any questions, thoughts, or observations before we finish?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of ground there, really. I say the Eco Hub's going to be a massive thing. I think that will combine a lot of the work that we do and the Eco Group do, and hopefully both councils, Northants and Wellingborough Town Council, will grab this as a positive for the town, and something that will lead in this area, but also spread around Northamptonshire and possibly the county, Harry. So that would be a really good thing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
But we can always work across anyway, can't we, Harry?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah,
so we don't just have to wait for the councils to do this.
We'll tell you what we're doing all the time, and
sorry, did you want to say something, Harry, before we finish?
I just want to say thank you very much.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do too. So thanks very much for your brilliant presentation, Jonathan, and for all your hard work in creating it. And thank you to everybody for coming. We'll be back again for the last session on Thursday, October the 6th at 7 p.m. And I'm gonna try and talk a bit about adaptations then, but also do a bit of a review of the programme, and then maybe have further discussions about what to do next. Things are starting to emerge, but it would be good to get some forum for action going as well as forums for discussion. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye everybody. Thank you.